Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babyar, and I'm the Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you are a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, and fully funded Great Commission worker. Our guests today are Dave and Liz Flynn. They are with the Center for Mission Mobilization, which is based out of Fayetteville, Arkansas. However, they live in Lima, Peru, and are mobilizers and have been very active in support raising for a long time on the state side, but now increasingly so in the South American side and in Latin culture. And Dave, I know that you have been working really hard with a team on a really special project that you helped complete recently, which was the God Ask, but in Spanish. What do you call it?
The God Ask, El Pedido Divino. That was an interesting one because the God Ask itself, the title, God is being used as an adjective, not as a noun, and the ask is the noun. And so in Spanish, that just confused a lot of input, but we were able to get through that with El Pedido Divino. Great.
So Liz, did you do all the translation work for him or none at all?
Well, I helped here and there.
Okay. Now, I should mention that Liz grew up in Peru until what age?
8.
Age 8, and then you moved to Jersey.
And I grew up there.
Yeah, and Dave, you grew up in Jersey as well, correct?
I'm from Jersey, yeah.
Yeah, I can hear how you say coffee sometimes. It's definitely still there. Well, listen, it's wonderful to have you guys back as guests again. This is not the first podcast that we've invited you on, but you have a lot to contribute. And so when we're talking about support raising in particular, I think it's interesting for us to really try to seek to understand what's going on with support raising outside of the borders of the United States. And with you both having such deep ties now to South America and even living there and some of the work you have done, I just think it's worth our time to just kind of find out, get a little peek behind the curtain. What's been going on with support raising with Christians in Latin culture? In particular, what are some of the lessons you have been learning? So I'll tell you that rather than me just kind of starting picking around at that, I overheard you say something earlier about a lady in particular that was dealing with some doubt about her ability to raise support. Can you kind of unwrap that for me a little bit, Liz?
Well, we have a friend. She is actually our first national staff in Peru.
Okay.
And her name is Yusei, and she helped us proofread the God Ask, El Pedido Divino.
Okay.
And it took her a few months to do it, and I think she was very amazed at what it said about fundraising.
So her job was really to translate, but she started paying attention to what it was she was translating?
Well, no, she edited.
Oh, she edited.
Already
Okay.
translated.
Oh, okay,
she edited it. So, she was very amazed at all the different things that you do and not do as you fundraise.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a few months later, we had a training in Argentina, and we really wanted her to come.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't think she could ask anybody, and especially her church denomination.
Okay.
So I said, well, you can just ask. The worst they can say is no.
Sure.
And she goes, no, I don't know, because I'm a girl, I'm a woman, and they're not going to give to me. But eventually I just encouraged her over a bunch of days, and she did.
Okay. No, don't tell me the end of that story just yet. Dave, what are some of the things that are unique to Latin culture when it comes to doing the ask? And maybe it is more specifically to females within Latin culture.
I think a lot of giving in Latin American culture for missions, and there's not a lot of it, but there's some. A lot of it is aimed at mission projects. And so, people that are missionaries or people involved in the church that are going to go on a mission trip, they find it a lot easier to raise funds for a specific project, a work project, or something that's tangible, something that is short term.
Right.
The church can take up a collection and give it to them, but there's no ongoing monthly commitment or yearly commitment.
So it's more project than people as far as the focus of those funds.
Exactly. And so, that's not as much of a difficult thing. So for this instance with Yusei, it was travel. It was covering the cost of her airfare. And she was just, no, I can't do that. I mean, they're not going to do that. And Liz was basically saying, you just read the book.
Right.
Ask.
Right.
And she didn't think, oh, no, they can't do that at all. But It's one of the dynamics. There's a lot of dynamics and differences between raising support in North America as compared to raising support in Latin America.
Sure. Well, back to this story, though, with you, Liz, and this process of, I don't know if it's just probably was more than just convincing. It was probably praying with her and praying for. What do you feel was the point where you had a little bit of breakthrough and she went, you know what, I can do this. I can ask. Maybe she wasn't filled with confidence, but she felt like it was at least something she could attempt.
I think it has to do with the people in her denomination she was dealing with.
Okay.
And I really think she felt she didn't feel at peace asking them. Because right off the bat, she said, no, they're not going to give me. So I said, well, how about if you just kind of hint that you need to go to this conference and you would want them to go to this because you would be an asset to them if you did this training.
Right.
And she said, okay, I'm going to ask. And then a few days later, she goes, guess what? They're going to pay half my airfare. Oh. I said, see? I said, this is wonderful.
Right. But she, in her head, she'd already decided there's no way.
Right. She didn't think she could do it. So
wow.
We were thrilled. We were just thrilled for her.
Yeah.
And then when it came down to the fact of giving her the funds so we can buy the plane ticket, they gave her the entire amount.
Praise the Lord.
And she was beside herself.
Oh, yeah.
This has never happened before, and much less to a girl. And so she was thrilled. And
so
we were able to go with her to this training that she needed.
Great.
And the idea, and I had told her as well, I says, you say this is it's not a formula. It's not a magical thing that you need to do to move God's arm. And there are some theologies that teach that you have to say or believe a certain order of things. I said, it's just a principle. It's a biblical principle that God honors. And that's what happened here.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, now as we talk about raising support in Latin America, I am almost ill-qualified to ask questions. I realize that because I know that there is some deep thinking and difficult work that has been done by people like yourself that I haven't even touched. But as you guys have really transitioned as a married couple from Arkansas down to Peru over the past few years, I'm sure that you've noticed a lot of little differences here and there. But what are some major themes that you're seeing from Central America down to South America when it comes to support raising in a Latin culture?
Yeah, well, I think one of the big ones would be that Latin America is much more of a shame honor culture than North America, and so they are not as direct as we would be in North America. Asking it's a little scary for them to ask someone, because what if they say no?
Okay,
one of us is going to be shamed. But when they get beyond that as well, if they do ask, what we've learned very often, people may say, yes, I'll support you. And they're basically saying yes because they don't want to say no, because that would be shaming you or themselves. So they say yes, but they really don't mean yes. And maybe the first month they will support for sure. The second month, maybe. But by the third month, that support stops.
Crickets.
Yeah. And what happens is now, continuing the shame honor dynamic of Latin America, they're not going to go back and call them like we would in North America after missing a month or two, say, hey, what's up? I noticed you haven't been given. They will never do that.
Oh, really?
So they just go without support. They will never call them back on that.
So is that something that when you had the opportunity to speak to people with, how do you get around that? Is that something where culturally you can't tell them to go back? Or is that something where you say, well, no, because it's an investment, they probably want to. You need to clarify with it. I mean, how do you get around that?
Yeah, I think up front, obviously, trying to secure that. We have some things that we're suggesting. The idea is monthly support, and it has to do with the culture too.
Okay.
The culture is used to missionaries coming down and serving in Latin America, perhaps.
Right. Coming there, not going elsewhere.
Coming there, but they have been used to being on the receiving end of missionaries. So it's somewhat of a new thing for them to be on the sending end of missionaries. The church hasn't caught on to that as a whole church yet, the vision for supporting missionaries. So it's a new concept in many ways. They're used to giving money in the offering for a missionary project, perhaps, and it's usually just change. It's not sacrificial giving. It's just whatever leftover change you may have. But to sacrificially give in support of personal missionary, it's all the giving is done to the church, not to individual people necessarily. So there's a lot of differences like that.
So there's some biblical literacy that needs to happen on the part of the asker, but that probably comes into play sometimes on the person being asked.
Yeah, no doubt. And so that's the whole idea of mobilizing. Mobilization is really bringing that vision and awareness to the whole church.
Absolutely. Let's take a few seconds to mention an important resource that can be helpful for support raisers. CMM Press has published another great book that is not only for those who raise their personal support, but also they oversee teams or even an organization whose staff teams raises their own personal support. Scott Morton is a champion for biblically based ministry partnership development, so I highly recommend that you pick up a copy of his book called Blind Spots. It's available at cmmpress.org, where you can receive a 10% discount if you use the code SRS Podcast. So, Dave, with that being a cultural thing that you need to be aware of, I imagine that you try to game plan and pray through and think about how to follow up with that. But, let's say you actually have that situation actively where a support raiser has invited somebody to partner with them in ministry. That person said yes, and then after a month or two, it's kind of drying up or going away. How do you appropriately be aware what the culture is and yet bridge that gap? Because long term, that's not sustainable if there's not good communication and follow up, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I think, we try to encourage as much as possible communication. Just continue to communicate with them. Let them know what's happening in your ministry. Occasionally they can call just to check up on them. How can I pray with you? I mean, those are good contact points. And sometimes that may even prompt them. Oh, yeah, I need to support you. Sorry, I forgot to send it in. I'd rather be more proactive on the front end. And if monthly support is an issue, is going to be a struggle or a problem in Latin America, what I've been counseling Latinos on is I've been basically telling them, look, in our boot camps, we say the average missionary has between 40 and 60 supporters.
Okay.
And what if you were to find 52 families, individuals, whatever, that would be able to cover 1 week per year of your finances? And you let them pick that week.
Okay.
In fact, and you're communicating all year long, and they're just going to cover 1 week. It's not monthly support they're going to be given, but they're going to send in a gift once a year for 1 week.
So from a math standpoint, it's the same answer, but it's different arithmetic.
Well, yeah. And now, when I share that with Latinos, their faces light up. They say, yeah, that would work, because Latinos would not renege on that. They would definitely follow through with that, especially if they've been communicating well all throughout the year. And they say, hey, on that week, I'm going to call you. I want to share with you what's going on. I want to pray with you. I want to see what's going on in your life and share some prayer requests. And they are reminding them their week is coming up, and they know that special week is one that they selected and they're committed to cover. They will follow through with that. And so I've shared that. Some people say, can I do that? Yes, by all means, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm assuming that's just great cultural exegesis from the standpoint of you are being aware of what's going on. There aren't biblical principles being changed or moved around and all that. It's simply how you get people to partner with you in the gospel. And so you kind of uncovered a gem. Are there other things you've learned that are pretty unique, at least to Latin America, and it may not be true for everybody. And by the way, we realize Latin America is a large swath of geography and beautiful peoples that are not all the same. We're speaking in generalizations. We realize that. We definitely know that. But from Central America down to South America, what are some other little trends or cultural idiosyncrasies that might seem a little different to those who have grown up in the U.S.?
I think in the U.S., I think we tend to go from church to church. Maybe in our lifetime, we might be part of 3 or 4 churches. But in Latin America, they go to one church only all of their lives.
Oh, really?
So their network is very, very tiny. It's very small. So that represents a little bit of a challenge. They just don't up and leave, because everything, they really look to their pastor for advice, and they basically do what the pastor says. So in a way, we have to try to not change them, but just change their worldview on that.
Just change their thinking, their approach to that.
That's a challenge for us.
Great.
The other thing, Liz mentioned the pastor. Many pastors in Latin America, the majority of churches are small. They're not large. They do have some large churches, but the majority are small. And many of the pastors work a second, sometimes a third job just to make ends meet.
Sure.
And they get a little bit serving as a pastor. And then a missionary now comes up through the congregation. They say, I want to be a missionary in such and such a country. And hey, this is how much I need. And the pastors look at that and say, whoa, I'm not making 1/10 of that. Where is all that money going? And it's a surprise. Pastors are sometimes very fearful that the little limited amount of funds that are in the congregation now are going to start being channeled for missionaries. So it's not something pastors get very excited about.
Okay.
Or they may suggest, well, look, I work a second job. Why can't you work a job overseas as well? Why can't you struggle a little bit?
Right. So tell you what, I think the obvious question then is, so now what? Like, what do you do? How do you lean in on that? And I realize that's different for every situation, but what do you counsel people that's their church, it's their home church, it's the only church they've ever known, and their pastor is saying, no, don't go anywhere else, don't do anything else, just stay right here and take on another job and do what ministry you can?
We would say you need to serve the church. Obviously, you need to be involved in the church and serve the church. And that's going to be one of the things, if they could be mobilizing their church as well. And that's the idea, is that they want their church to have a vision for mission. Right. Many churches don't. Sure. They know they're Jerusalem, maybe they're Judea, and maybe occasionally they'll take a short-term trip out to the province of Samaria. But the other ends of the earth is not part of their vision. And so we want them to serve in their church with a servant heart. Don't be critical at all, but mobilize your church. Right. And I've had many, many Latinos come up to me and say, David, tenemos plata. We have money. Latinos have money. But they're not thinking long-term necessarily, and it's a matter of what are they spending their money on. Right. And so while there's a lot of resources that are mobilizing missionaries and raising up missionaries, that's great. But if we're not mobilizing the church to support them, we're just going to have a lot of missionaries eager to go in the missionary candidates, really. Right. Eager to go in the mission field without support. Right. And so we need to look at, for instance, a scenario of the student volunteer movement. 20,000 students committed themselves to become missionaries. 80,000 committed to the mission. And basically with the main base, the funding base for those 20,000. And that's what we need to be thinking of, mobilizing the whole church. So if a missionary candidate or a Latino is in that situation, I would say serve your church, mobilize your church. Right. And eventually, it may take a lot longer than 4 months, 6 months for support. Yeah. Of course, it's gonna. Right. But they need to be able to think long term. Yeah. Paul went 3 years before he returned to Jerusalem, so it took a couple of years.
To take a slightly different tactic here as we wrap up. I want to talk about mobilization, particularly from the standpoint of mobilizing Latin America, and I've heard some stories that I believe to be true, but I'd rather kind of hear it from you. I have heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there is a great inroads into the Middle East with missionaries that have been mobilized from Latin America, and that there's something to do with maybe it's with the culture and just the family dynamics and the similarities. But by comparison, I've heard, if the U.S. sends missionaries to the Middle East, they're not very welcome sometimes, whereas those coming out of Latin America aren't just welcomed, they're welcomed with open arms. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I know that's part of what you guys are doing, and I got a feeling there's probably some people even listening to this that don't fully even grasp what mobilization means.
Yes, I think there's a lot of the Latino culture is very similar to other cultures outside of the U.S., and Latinos specifically have a lot of features that can appear to be Middle Eastern. So if they grow a beard or the girls wear their headpiece, you can't tell them apart. I think one time we were walking, I don't remember what country, but we saw a group of ladies and guys, and we couldn't tell them apart. They looked Latino. And the culture, of course, is also an honor shame culture. So very similar, and I think that is the reason why they're just welcome with open arms, because they value family, they value time, they value friendships. They're just very, very similar. It's just amazing how the Lord, they don't speak the same language, and they're not in the same area in the world, but they're very, very similar.
Right. There's also several thousand words in the Spanish language that actually have Arabic roots.
Yes. Oh, really?
Yeah. And so those things, they can't talk to each other necessarily. Sure. But Liz is right. Yeah. Just cultural similarities are amazing, as well as the physical characteristics.
Interesting.
And they're welcome. They're welcome in many of the Muslim countries that typical white people like me would never be able to get into.
Yeah. And that's definitely the flip side of that is, If missions rides alone on Caucasian Americans being sent out to the world, we will never get every tribe, tongue, and nation. It's not going to happen. And so we definitely want to mobilize believers from other countries and other regions, not just from the U.S. And I really appreciate that you guys are on the front lines of that and that you're doing that. So thank you for joining me today. Thank you for speaking into this topic. I get the feeling there's a lot more that can and will be said and written on this topic in the future. But your role in making sure that God Ask is translated and helping to develop a Spanish version of the SRS boot camp and even just in the lives you're touching and changing right now in Peru is wonderful for the kingdom. And I really count it an honor to be your friend. So
well, it's been a blessing.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisengsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.